Hey, this is Jay Snodgrass. This is Animal Magic, and today we're going to do a very special episode, not about an animal. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Stonehenge. Summer is coming. I can say that with cautious confidence because Elizabeth isn't here. Elizabeth is a person for whom winter is always coming, a person for whom the glass is always half full of hot tea for a cold day. In July, she says winter is coming. In September, she says winter is coming. Instead of a wall calendar, we have a winter is coming poster that hangs in our kitchen all year round. Even in February, she says winter is coming. And I think it's winter already. But then I realize she's talking about next winter. Then we always get a warm week in early March, and I say spring is coming. And she sniffs the air, listens to the sounds of the birds and the breeze through the trees, and says, no, wait till May. Then we get blizzards and icy blasts and gales through March and April, and spring arrives precisely when she prophesied it would. In 20 years of marriage, this little conversation is one of the cycles of nature. Sunrise, sunset, year in, year out, I get these little reminders that Elizabeth is always right. And I'm not bothered by it, because when Elizabeth is right, it indirectly means I'm right too, because I married the right person. But now, during this heat wave, I nervously predict that summer is coming. And with the inevitable cycles of nature, as summer approaches, it's time to contemplate the mysteries of Stonehenge again. The site of Stonehenge was sacred and mystifying even before the big, mysterious rocks got mysteriously dragged there. During some archaic ice age, a solemn procession of glaciers passed through England's Salisbury Valley, dredging a groove aligned with the midsummer sunrise. Then, 10,000 years ago, people dug pits along this axis to erect 3 massive wooden pillars, perhaps totem poles, aligned with a giant tree. Ironically, this earliest phase of sacred architecture was discovered while enlarging the tourist parking lot in the 1960s. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot, Joni Mitchell's saying. But in this case, expanding a parking lot actually revealed something about a long-lost paradise. Maybe someday, while building a Starbucks for Stonehenge sightseers, excavators will finally unearth an ancient rune stone or whatnot, explaining what the heck it all meant. But I sort of hope they don't, because that would ruin all the fun of pseudoscientific speculation. You see, ruin the fun. That would have got a big laugh at the Archaeology convention. Anyway, the original construction at the site was wooden, and shepherds held parties there for centuries. We know it because of their trash. They were ancient litter bugs, smashing their beer pots and mead mugs and tossing bones of animals they'd eaten. You can learn a lot about people by digging through their garbage. I was once told that Stonehenge is a solar clock, so that stiff Brits could always be perfectly punctual with their planting and harvesting. But if you plant in June to harvest in December, you'd be too feeble from starvation to drag big rocks around. I guess if you planted in December, you'd get pretty muscular from plowing through a frost, but I don't think anything would sprout in June. Anyway, it was built before farming caught on in Britain, and if early British farmers needed to know when to plant, they wouldn't need a giant sundial. They would just ask some ancient Elizabeth, and she would sniff the air and listen to the birds and say, winter is coming. Shepherds and shepherdesses built these things in wood, and then their distant descendants felt that it should be set in stone. Not just in this one valley, it was a major architectural trend of the time. Stonehenge is the most famous of about 120 stone circles scattered throughout England, Ireland, and Scotland, erected between 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. They were not like village churches. Archaeologists don't find evidence that communities actually lived around these monuments. Actually, they tend to be situated between territories of nomadic shepherding tribes, which suggests that they were pilgrimage sites for seasonal intertribal gatherings. When we look closer at the rocks themselves, we see further evidence of intertribal cooperation. The circles are generally composed of individual stones carried from different regions of a 6-mile area. A Stonehenge is something like a stone soup from that old story about individuals contributing to a communal pot. Shepherding tribes would generally avoid each other, but apparently they'd build these things for biannual intertribal gatherings, like an interfaith worship service, with each different religion contributing a sacred stone so that they'd all feel represented there. And it was a circle, so there was no cornerstone. No tribe got to be central or marginalized. All were equal at the gathering. This is what you needed the solar clock for. Because for an interfaith gathering, you want it clearly agreed when it's time to call someone rudely late. The most famous and mysterious Stonehenge has the most mysterious and complex of origin stories. In this case, the stones, some weighing 25 tons, the equivalent of 8 pickup trucks, have been carried from a range of 20 to 250 miles away. The altar stone and uprights were dragged or ferried from Wales. It seems the monument existed in some rough draft form and was then disassembled, transported, and reassembled in England, replacing the older wood henge. The blue stones of Stonehenge are comprised of 13 different kinds of rock brought from the surrounding areas, a sign of unity in diversity. During the Henge period, the archaeological record shows a decline in warfare, a remarkable lack of fortifications, and very little evidence of social inequality. No high-status dwellings or lavish royal burials. It seems to have been a brief time of relative peace and possibly equality. Even a room full of squirming Sesame Street preschoolers could easily spot how this megalithic monument differs from its cousins, the Egyptian pyramids, the ziggurat of Ur, and other ancient skyscrapers. In some cultures, massive building projects were signs of dictatorial domination by a slave-driving elite. But here, instead of the vertical hierarchical triangle representing a social pyramid, Stonehenge is a horizontal circle, a sign of equality. And not just human equality. The orientation is inward and outward, situating celebrants in relation to the natural world around them, instead of a triangle pointing to some superior, supernatural otherworld above. I don't want to go too far out on a stone limb, which is a lot more dangerous than going out on a tree limb, but in the Britain of this era, we're not seeing the telltale signs of male-dominated warrior-king culture. Warrior tombs, burial waste of toxic masculinity, so the possibility of gender balance is not out of the question. The concentric rings of ditches, mounds, and stones suggest a feminine unity of nature. Not that the stones themselves represent goddesses, but they are likely jewelry on a giant Mother Earth, like a belly button ring. The henge also has a masculine consort, the 16-foot heel stone. It stands alone 250 feet outside the circle, but twice a year it pays a visit, extending its phallic shadow into the center on the sunset of the winter solstice and the sunrise of the summer solstice. Stonehenge is a solar clock, marking time as a repeating cycle of seasons. In nature, we can easily see that all time is in circles. The stone circle is a symbolic reproduction of a biological clock with annual cycles of nature's renewal, fertility, sterility, renewal, and so on. It is a womb, and thus the mysterious Stonehenge casts the whole world as a large-scale replica of a fertile goddess. What kind of rituals were originally practiced at the circles? We just don't know. If shepherding tribes were gathering twice a year to celebrate fertility by watching a phallic shadow penetrate a circle, it's possible that things got frisky. For these shepherding tribes, it was a yearly chance for sheepish teenagers to meet other teens they weren't closely related to, like going to church camp or a concert camping festival. And we don't necessarily need to imagine Stonehenge in its day looking like a ghostly gray ring of tombstones. I like to imagine the stone arches dressed and decorated in colorful woolen banners and flags representing the tribal cultures gathered there. For that matter, there's no reason to imagine Stonehenge rituals with somber, monotonous chanting. The positioning of the stones amplifies and distorts sound, so with thundering sheepskin drums, carved bone flutes, and blown seashells, it could have sounded like a rave party. If Stonehenge rituals were wild and embodied, that does not mean that they couldn't simultaneously be spiritual and intellectual. In her book, The Spiral Dance, Starhawk wrote that henges are, quote, great reservoirs of subtle energy, gateways between the world of the seen and unseen. Within the circles, priestesses could probe the secrets of time and the hidden structure of the cosmos. Not just kooky New Age mumbo-jumbo, but mathematics, science, and astronomy. Also probably some kooky New Age mumbo-jumbo. The archaeologist Roland Hutton wrote, "For centuries, Stonehenge has functioned as a mirror in which modern people can reflect and justify their own prejudices, ideals, and expectations. Those who find their own time and society lacking have seen in it the work of ancestors of a superior knowledge and morality. Those who preach the creed of progress or their own religion, or else the folly of religion in general, have filled it in their imagination with gory, barbaric, and orgiastic ancient rites." Throughout history, the mysterious stone circle has been a screen for various cultures and religions to project their hopes and fears onto. But deep down, they all know, and we know it too, Stonehenge was built by ancient Unitarian Universalists, obviously. It was a cooperative project so that the tribes could bring their flocks and teens and gods together and twice a year remember that they have something in common. Human beings are naturally tribal, suspicious of people who are different, with a special animosity toward others who are most like themselves, just different enough to be infuriating. But when summer comes, even the most disagreeable of neighbors have to admit that we're all human beings, and it feels good to sing together. This summer, tourists from around the world will flock to Stonehenge, coming in from all directions, even more than usual, since the United States has declared a Cold War on tourism. And when the tourists gather for the English solstice ritual, I hope they can put away their phones for a minute, set aside the architectural mystery, and appreciate a moment of togetherness. It's one thing we can all agree on. I won't make it to Stonehenge, but in the Snodgrass house, the summer solstice is the one day of the year when Elizabeth and I can agree that summer is coming. Thank you. This is Jay Snodgrass, and this is Animal Magic. And if you've enjoyed this episode, there is a fun chapter about English midsummer traditions and Stonehenge in my book, Jolly Holidays. And also, some cool things about English, indigenous English traditions in my book, Supernatural Shakespeare, Magic and Ritual in Merry Old England.